actually.
If you're ready, and your esteemed presenters are here.
Okay, thank you. Well,
And
let's,
hold on, if I may, Ms.
Yep.
Aaron, are we okay? We good to go? All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this evening Ms. Kathy Sexton and Mr. John Nalbandian, and I will let them introduce themselves because my voice is pathetic and squeaky, better than it was yesterday, however. So, Ms. Kathy, I will turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kelly. Appreciate you all asking us to be here tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Kathy Sexton. I recently served 16 years as city manager in Derby. And so part of our agenda, and I'm sure part of the reason I was asked to come tonight, is just to share how things were done in Derby, because there's some similarities and some differences there. So I did retire from there in December and served the last 6 months as an interim assistant city manager in Wichita. So that was an exciting experience and a learning experience. And then just recently, I think 2 weeks ago, was announced that I have joined the Wichita State, the PPMC, Public Policy Management Center, which is a group of folks who help communities as well as nonprofits with special projects, we'll call them, right? Surveys, and do you think you've hired them in the past? And so I'm the senior management consultant there. So having been a former city and county manager, I was 12 years at Sedgwick County as assistant county manager before going to Derby. So grew up in Kansas on a farm and actually have a little farm in Harvey County just outside of Newton. So I do come to Newton quite frequently. First time in City Hall, though. So thank you for having me. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. John Nalbandian here. I am a retired faculty member at the University of Kansas School of Public Affairs and Administration. I grew up in Los Angeles, and my degrees are from University of Southern California. So Kansas was a very different for us. And we came to Lawrence, and we thought we'd spend a couple of years and go back to LA, but it just grew on us. And so I spent time in the service in the Army. I worked for Central Intelligence for a couple of years. My work at the University of Kansas was my first and only faculty job. I was the chair of the department there during the time at KU. I also was 8 years on the city commission, and I don't know if you know this, but our form of government is as far as I know, is exactly like yours. So, we have 5 commissioners, three go election at a time, top vote getter, that mayor, so on and so forth. So I won 2 4-year terms, and so I was the mayor on 1 year on both occasions. So, I go around the country and do workshops now on different subjects having to do with local government. So it's, and I just, in 2021, in spring 2021, I was asked to chair a task force in Lawrence looking at modifications of form of government, focusing on the possibility of a directly elected mayor and then moving from at-large to districts. And so we can talk about that a little bit tonight, too.
We're here to do whatever you all want to do, so we're thinking this is a conversation, and we'd like to share a little if you want to start with that, and then Q&A and discussion as we go along, as well as after we each give a little bit of an overview. Mayor, if that's acceptable, unless anybody wants to start with something a little different. Objectives then are just simply to share kind of our experience in 2 communities here with communities with similarities and differences with Newton, but then certainly be available for whatever questions you want to cover going from there. And I don't know how you all do it, but I'm sure maybe others have questions as well, so feel free. In Derby, we'll start with that. We have to have a drink of water every once in a while. So Derby has what is considered in Kansas a traditional city of the second class form and has had it for quite some time. And you may have heard a couple years ago, Derby changed from second class to first class. And was basically forced to by the state law as far as population growth got to the point that it was required. But way back in 2008, we looked at changing to city of the first class and decided not to at the time. We didn't see any benefit, and they didn't want any changes in the form of government. But a traditional city of the second class is 9 elected officials, 8 city council. It's a mayor, council manager form. So it's an at-large elected mayor, and then it's 4 city council members from 4 wards elected at that election, and then 2 years later, the other 4. So you have 8 total city council members, 2 from each of 4 wards, but they are elected, we'll say, at every other election, right? So there's always one senior person from Ward 1 and one junior council member from Ward 1. And so the community, and they've talked about changing that. As you know, Derby has about 26,000 in population now. When I started working there as city manager in 2006, there were 17,000. So the growth, trend is steeper, obviously, than Newton. But we always benchmarked with Newton, with Dodge City, Garden City, Salina, Hutchinson, because we always felt like you wanted to benchmark with cities that are a little bigger and cities that are a little smaller, but a lot of it with Newton was not per se population, but we struggled to find a benchmark in the metro area. We're all pulling from the same labor force and culture of this South Central Kansas community, but really no other city other than Newton of a similar size. So in Derby, the at-large elected mayor, what I gave you all in front of you is a one-pager. This is an excerpt, actually, page 12, from our governing body manual. So years ago, we developed a manual, and it's online on the city council page if you ever wanted to look at the whole document. It gets updated every couple years, but it is essentially saying, here's the page that says what the mayor's job is and the council president's job. That's this page. Then there's a page that says, here's the role of the city manager, and here's the role of the council meeting, what we do in council meetings and different, basically it's a primer for brand new elected officials and people thinking about running for elections. So I think this document goes through it pretty well in terms of saying that the mayor does not have power to vote on every single issue. Mayor, just like you all, runs the meeting. But generally speaking, most, as I imagine is probably true here too, most items don't get passed by one person voting, one vote difference, even though you have 5 people voting. But with 8 people voting, generally, you don't have very many ties either. I mean, generally, everything's going to be, 5-3, 4-6-2, or generally even more than that. But occasionally, the mayor would break a tie. And of course, if someone's absent and you have 7 people voting, then the mayor knows he's not going to vote on something, right? But occasionally that would come up. The veto that the mayor has is just for ordinances. The standing right to vote on things is for charter ordinances, which, as you know, is a much higher level, permanent kind of thing than a regular ordinance, but also the employment matters of the city manager. So as you know, and I imagine is similar here, that even with mayor, council, manager, the mayor and the council together, the 9-member group is called the governing body in terms of state law, where there's some things that are specified for the governing body. That's changed a little bit in recent changes to the law, but the mayor in Derby does have the equal vote to all 8 council members when it comes to hiring a city manager, any kind of discipline or termination of a city manager, as well as the annual performance review. Same equal vote. So there is a little bit of that, okay, and every mayor, I've worked for 2 different mayors in my 16 years, so there's always that sort of, well, if I'm at large, aren't I more important than the other ones? Well, yes, but you have to think about on what and how. So I think this document goes through it pretty well. It's not about always the power or the more important higher level of an official is not per se your vote on any issue, because you do have that equal vote, but it's more about the leadership that you choose to use as mayor. And as listed here, things like nominating people to be on the boards. Yes, you still have to get the approval of, here it would be 4 other people, but the mayor's the one who decides, well, are we going to advertise these positions? Are we going to make a push to make sure, you know, different parts of the community are involved? Are we just going to put the word out or just say, well, I want this person? Or are we going to say, no, we'd like each board to be balanced and have, you know, men and women and other demographic kinds of balances on it? So that is a leadership issue for the mayor. And I'd like to talk about, and I think it's really listed in here, it's that policy leadership. If the mayor isn't talking to the people, finding out and listening to the people, finding out what they want, but also facilitating conversations about policy, then you know, it's sort of like people will look to the city manager to do that. And sometimes I say, well, this is what you're elected for. Now, I don't know, I will claim complete ignorance on how you all handle the roles of the vice mayor here. So in Derby, we don't have a vice mayor, and it's just terminology, but we have a council president. And that's why I gave you that here too, because the council chooses their leader, and that's the council president. It's probably going to be a little bit different with 4 people than it is with 8 people. But if you can imagine the magnitude there of having 8 people, say someone gets elected as mayor, at-large mayor, and they have an agenda that maybe doesn't mesh with a lot of the other 8. So then you could, you know, basically, and I mean, I've seen a lot. So I'll just say, you might have a council member that doesn't get along with the mayor, doesn't like the way they're doing something, what have you.
We have
And-
several.
Well, there you go, there you go. And I know sometimes as staff, I would, you know, go to, Kathy, what about this and what about this? And it's like, well, have you tried to talk? I mean, the first answer is always talk directly to the person, because we're all just people. You know, it doesn't matter what title we have, we are real people, and so if we just talk to each other, we might be able to resolve the issue. But if that doesn't work, you go to your council president, because when there's 8 of you and you've elected a leader and you feel like the mayor needs to be told something or asked to do something or change something, you then go to your council president, because that's the person you've elected. And they literally in Derby have more authority than the other 7 council members. Now, the council president gets elected every year, every January, by the other 7. And occasionally they've carried over that person to be that, you know, the council president 2 years in a row, occasionally. I've seen places do it where it's sort of a seniority thing. Oh, it's her turn now. Let her be council. Well, you still have to vote. But then, you know, I've also seen it where the senior person isn't beloved by the other 7 or enough to get I mean, it takes 4, I guess 5, it takes 5, 4 plus you. It takes 5 to get elected to council president. So I've seen it when somebody has seniority, but the 5 won't be able to get there. They can't get the 8 people to vote for them because they don't feel like that's the person they can confide in. Now, keep in mind, the council president's role is to lead the annual review of the city manager. Well, that's a job. Okay, I mean, there's a form and you have to send it out and you have to remind them because they don't get it in on time, and there's 8 of them, you know, so I mean, it's like herding cats sometimes. You got to get it in by this date, and then you got to make your answers legible, and you got to write something on this form. And so sometimes the council president is the person who's handling that kind of task, and then they literally have that confidence role. That's the only person that sees what is written by the other 8 people about the city manager and how they're doing. And so you have that confidence of being able to read everybody's and accumulate all the results, and then facilitate the executive sessions where any issues are discussed and you know, hashed through, because maybe one council member thinks the city manager's doing a great job and another council member thinks exactly the opposite. Well, between the mayor and the council president, they talk through those issues and try to figure out where they go from there. So on the PowerPoint slide, you can see I just put the basics, and it's about who votes and what the mayor does with appointments. But I think the other handout gives you a little more of the day-to-day. The mayor keeps busy in Derby as the at-large elected official with things like speaking engagements. You can call it ribbon cuttings. I say that lovingly because with the growing community, every week there is a business opening with a ribbon cutting or a special event to go to. You know what I mean? Or
The mayor and I were just having this discussion last evening about how busy he is.
Well,
recently.
it's important.
There's only been a few in the past
It's
3 or 4
good.
weeks.
It's really good.
Well, when, maybe one week you have the volunteer reception and thanking the volunteers from the senior center. The mayor does. He cooks them the hot dogs and the hamburgers at lunch, you know what I mean? And people are like, hey, the mayor's cooking food. I mean, that's pretty cool. The mayor's thanking us for volunteering for the whole year. So it's not all actual ribbon cuttings, although, I say that, but some of it is just, it's time to have the fire department's annual dinner, and the council members are welcome, and they often go, but the mayor's the one who speaks or shakes the hands or hands out the awards. And so there's always a leadership role. And I think, too, I'll just say one last thing before taking any questions or comments or turning it over to John to talk about Lawrence. There is that piece about leadership that it's what you say and how you say it. It's how you treat people. And I've seen mayors do this well. Really, where I'm just looking at going, wow, I sure am glad he's up there talking about, you know what I mean? Because you have your spiel, and sometimes your spiel is to out-of-town business people or developers, and sometimes your spiel is to the pastors in your community or, or a business opening. I mean, there's always different spiels, and that takes energy, and it takes enthusiasm, and it's rigorous. And so we call it in Derby, we always called it the relationship of the manager and the city manager and the mayor as being really just hand in glove, because there are specific roles for each. And like I say, when I have council members that maybe didn't get along with the mayor real great, they would come to me and I would say, well, this is why it's hard. This is why, I mean, we can do hard things, but I cannot solve that for you. So we found that this worked pretty well in terms of laying out the roles, letting council members elect a leader, but not be the same as their at-large mayor, but someone that they could have, I guess, the back seat, so to speak, so that the mayor always knew if he needed to be out of town, if he had a trip planned, if he didn't feel well, that council president was going to run that meeting that night. Or do whatever else was needed. And obviously some of you all probably are retired, some of you all probably have full-time jobs, and then some of you are probably somewhere in the middle there. And that's always nice to have a team, that you can rely on to help with things. So I don't know if any of that has helped, but that's kind of the lay of the land in Derby.
What's the compensation structure in Derby for the mayor and for the council members, if any?
Yes, there is a little bit. It's not very much, and I think it's $100 a month for a council member, and that's 2 meetings. I mean, typically you have 2 council meetings a month with an occasional workshop, and then the mayor, $500 a month. I had to do a little quick math in my head there. $500 a month, but years ago they increased it to that amount. And that's been some years. Of course, the council's turned over a lot too lately, but I know I was talking to a colleague the other day who talked about a number of cities who have gone higher than that. And I have no idea what y'all do here, but it's all over the board.
And then does the mayor there in Derby have his own office at City Hall, or how does that work?
That's a great question. The first mayor I worked for years ago, he did have an office. Now, keeping in mind, this is a new building that was built and opened in 2002, built bigger than was needed because as a growing community. So there were extra offices. And he only used it for when he had somebody who called up and said, I want to talk to the mayor. Okay, well, he's here on Monday afternoons. We'll make an appointment for you. And they would go to his office to meet. Or if he was interviewing somebody for a board or commission appointment, we would schedule those in the mayor's office. Now, having said that, when we had turnover, and he was a longtime mayor, several terms. When we got a new mayor a few years ago, I think he's been there 6 years, so he's on his second term now. He knew that we had grown. We didn't have we didn't have any offices left in the building. I mean, we just, you know what I mean? Over my 16 years, you get to where, well, we had a city planner, now we have an assistant city planner. We had a city engineer, now we have an assistant city engineer. We had a communications person, now we have 3.5 people. You know, you just need more offices as you grow. So the new mayor said, I don't think I need my own office. And I was like, you're right, you don't. Because whenever you have meetings, we schedule a conference room for you to have those meetings. And most of the time when he comes in, that turned out to be a set Monday afternoon, 3 o'clock meeting with me. So, and that was helpful to have a weekly meeting at a set time. And that was usually in my office because I had a little table, you know. So, but if we have a vacant office, the mayor would have that, but we just didn't have the vacant office anymore. And he's not going to be there all the time. And so he didn't want to take up space. And honestly, the conference room was nicer than a wee little office upstairs, you know what I mean? So, so it's not a full-time mayor or anything of the sort. It is just the way the current mayor has been handling it is one time a week, here's my set office hours time. The previous mayor said, just tell me when people want to meet or call up and schedule my meetings at a certain time. The previous mayor dropped in all the time. He just, whenever it was convenient for him. Of course, his job was outside sales, and so he was always driving around. So it made sense for him to drop in. And so for me, when he dropped in, it was kind of reprogram my brain from whatever I was working on and kind of drop everything and say, oh yeah, I made a list, here's the 3 things because I got used to him dropping in, make a list of what I wanted to talk to him about when he came in. Current mayor, Monday afternoon, 3 o'clock, and it's just, some weeks we might sit there and talk for 2 hours. Other weeks it might be, I don't have much, but it was the time we knew he was going to be in, so if people wanted to see him, or if we needed to take a photo, or we needed to have the Boy Scout troop in to stage a photo, you know, anything like that, we always said, well, we know this is the time to do that. So as you can imagine, none of that would hardly ever take place in the mayor's office anyway. That's why we felt like we don't really need an office. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
With 5 of us, we've been real fortunate. We understand what our job is, and we understand what the staff's job is. But if, I think you've always had good mayors. I've met 2 or 3 of them, and, but I'm sure there's also a mayor that someone that ran against him for mayor that probably wouldn't have been very good. What would have been your strategy as a city manager if somebody would have been elected that could have embarrassed the city, you know, on several occasions? Or it's always for a 4-year mayor, elected mayor, it's cool if they're really good, but I think it can really stink too if yeah, I mean, we wouldn't mind Clint, you know, being a 4-year mayor, but if we elected a couple of these yahoos that are on Facebook all the time that don't really pay attention to what's going on, it could be really bad.
Yeah, it's a great point because it's not even a judgment about a person. A lot of that is where you're from, because where you're from and what you think of the mayor's duties, it varies by state, it varies by cities. Different, because even in Kansas, where there's over 600 cities, a lot of them are wee tiny cities, and they don't have very many professional staff. I mean, they have a city clerk. They don't have a city administrator or anything, so the mayor's job is different. But I will tell you that a strategy is this governing body manual and the code of meeting procedure, both of which we developed after I was there a couple of years. And they're both online, and they both get reviewed every year by the council. We put it on the agenda every January, February to review. Everybody read your governing body manual, and if you want any changes, bring it up in the meeting, and you all vote for changes. And that's important because if you don't do that, nobody reads it, right? So you don't even know what's in it. But I can tell you, things have been put in this document over the years to help people understand what the role of each person is and is not. And so you might have noticed there's a funny little sentence there in the end of the second paragraph about the mayor's roles, and it says, "Staff prepares documents for signature by the mayor at City Hall." It's kind of like, well, of course. No, I remember when that was put in.
Yeah.
And it was because, sometimes a mayor thinks that, well, my signature is the thing. No, you don't have authority to sign a city document if the city commission has not approved that document in an open public meeting, right? I mean, the mayor doesn't have independent authority just because they're elected at large. They can't go out and write contracts with people and sign them. The rest of the document's clear, if this isn't clear in these two paragraphs, that their signature authority is about things that have been passed by the council, okay? It's not like you can go around the council just because you're elected at large, but sometimes, you get those questions, well, I'm elected at large, can't I do, well, no. Your form of government is council, mayor, council, manager. The council's in charge. And I get that in talking to colleagues, too. Some colleagues are city administrators, not a city manager. And a city administrator, generally, sometimes titles can be different, but sometimes the city administrator reports directly to the mayor, and the mayor is over not only the administrator, but also many of the department heads. And so it's this weird thing that goes on sort of behind the scenes where the manager or the administrator sort of manages the department heads, but sort of doesn't.
Yeah.
And it depends on each city as to how much the mayor wants to be involved in that hands-on management of each department head versus, but once you have a council manager or commission manager form, it's pretty clear that the mayor does not have power to just go buy stuff or go contract with stuff or. Now, here's a common one. When the mayor's out speaking about things, they say, well, the city wants this or the city wants that, and you're in the background and you're thinking, I don't remember voting on the city wanting that and wanting this. So that's one of the conversations you have to have. It's like personal opinion as an independent person, as a resident, as a citizen, I'm just one, you know what I'm talking about. I'm just one commissioner, but here's what I think. We should pave that road. But if you say, well, no, we should pave the road, and you're the mayor, people think that means you're speaking for the city.
Right.
And that is a very important role of the mayor, and I think becomes a bigger role personally. I think it's bigger if you're an at-large mayor. You're speaking for the city because even though you may not think you are, people think you are.
Good point.
So I have seen that some council members kind of cringe and go, Kathy, did you hear what he just said? He just said this and he was in, well, you need to call him on that and remind him that he's got to say, listen, my personal opinion, we haven't actually voted on this. Or it's going to come up for a vote next month, but here's my opinion. So as a mayor, you can influence public opinion, influence what the newspaper writes about what you're saying, or influence the votes of other commissioners by what you say and how you say that. But you certainly would want to back up if you were a mayor saying, well, here's what we need to do. And then you go to the actual meeting and it's 4-1 and the other 4 weren't thinking that. So, you obviously can't do that very long before people in town start saying, I don't think I believe the mayor. But if you're clear about, well, I believe this, but I don't know where the other commissioners are, we're going to vote next month.
The royal we.
So you have 8. So from a open meetings standpoint, you've got, and certain things the mayor can't vote on, then I would assume that 4 people could be together at a time. Can the mayor be there if it's something he's not voting on to be the 5th person, or is that would still be a violation?
Years ago, the quorum was set lower and 3 could talk. But then when state law changed, at first Derby didn't want to change it because they felt like this was important to for open government. But then I think a couple years later, they decided to go ahead and be the same as state law.
Yeah.
Majority of a quorum. So 4 can now talk, and it used to be 4 could not talk to each other. But that 4 is the governing body, so that could be the mayor and 3 council members.
Okay. The only thing about having 5 of us that I don't like is there's been time, I mean, we're exceptionally careful about 3 of us being together at one time, even at social events that are city-related social events. And if only 2 of us can be there, you know, it's a little bit weird.
What about serial meetings? How does that affect that? Like if somebody's going to the council president and the next one's going to the council president and the next one's going to the council president. Serial meetings run into there somewhere, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We do when we review each year, at the January, February timeframe, not only the governing body manual, but also the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. And the attorney always explains to them and reminds them, who knows what a serial meeting is? How many people can you text? Do you reply all on emails? You know, just getting it in their head because they forget.
Saying, please don't reply all.
Don't reply all. And they always
Someone replied all on our last email
Somebody
too, and it
replied all.
wasn't me.
There.
Yeah.
And so I think really a lot of that is just about like the repetitive part of education. It's like, remember, Kathy can send you all an email, because with 9, when I first got there in 2006, I had come from Sedgwick County, and we had 5 full-time, you know, elected commissioners with offices there, and we briefed them every week on agenda items. So I said, how do you want me to do the agenda review? Do you want me to come to your office as individuals? Do you want me to call you? You know, this is 9 meetings. And they were looking at me like, oh, no, we don't want to have those kind of meetings. And it's only twice a month. But it was very clear that with 9 people, it's hard to say the same thing 9 times. Okay? So it's hard to keep the story the same when you're briefing 9 different people. So we did, I routinely did email briefings on things. And it was that attorney telling, and now remember, Kathy can email you all, but when you reply, just reply to Kathy. And if you talk to anybody else, start counting. If the mayor called you, that's you and him. If you talk to the council member that you like to talk to all the time, well, that's 3. Now keep in mind, after that, if somebody else calls you, you ask them, okay, before you start talking, is this about subject A, right? Yes, it's about that. I can't talk to you anymore, you know, because I've already talked to 3 people, you know, that type of thing. Now it's 4 total. But they're pretty,
I'm just thinking about the council president and everybody going to that council president, then talking to that one person about an issue that might happen amongst the council or
Yeah.
whatever. So if you run into that serial meeting at that point.
I hear you. It's usually not like that. It's usually more division. I mean, there's 1 or 2 people offended by something that was said. It's not like they're all having the same issues. And when it comes to the city manager's annual review, it's a written form they're all supposed to give him, and then he can get back to each one and say, well, you know, on this one, you said this, and this one, I can't read your writing on this. So it's very specific and not policy-oriented. Now, I will say, too, I've seen a number of cities handle their open meetings differently in terms of that piece about a social event. I've seen some where they say, just send a notice out to the press. All 5 council members are going to the chamber luncheon today.
We typically try to err on the side of caution and do that.
I've seen cities say, and counties say, oh, there's 5, oh, only 2 can go. Don't you go to that event. I've been at events where there've been elected officials mad because the other guy showed up, and they was on a 5-member commission, so it was like, I can't believe she came to that because it's only supposed to be 2. And I'm sitting here going, what? You only allow 2 people to go to a community, like a retirement party or a chamber lunch or something you think, well, we're elected officials, we ought to be at this. So I think that different cities have different levels of tolerance on that, but some just say, just put it out as a notice that you're all going. What we would talk about in Derby a lot is, okay, if all y'all want to go to the fire department's dinner, some will bring your spouses, there's probably going to be 6 of them there. Well, don't all sit at the same table. Separate out, and, you know, so we give them advice like that. Sit at different tables. Don't ever talk about any city business, anything on the agenda, not a bit at a social event. If somebody starts talking about it, you know, if it's a constituent, that's one thing. If it's just you and a constituent. But if you've got even 2 or 3 council members start congregating, like at a reception, I or the city attorney would just mosey on over and say, so how are you today? Do you want to come over here and talk to me for a while? Just to kind of remind them that, okay, if you have 4 getting here, people are going to start wondering what you're talking about. But generally speaking, it's really just about learning it, and then you can live with I think you can live within any of those systems myself.
Have you been part of or watched the process in a community that had a form of government like we have here, and then go to the mayor at large, and how they present that to the public? You know, remind me, can we, us 5, make this decision to change without the public's consent?
It would be a change to the city's charter ordinance, sir, which would take a motion from the bench, and then if there was a protest petition in a certain amount of time, it would go to a vote of the people.
Supermajority.
Yes, it takes a supermajority, yeah. And I think, actually, that's really a great segue. I think John has been part of that process, and Lawrence.
Okay, good.
And so,
And
yeah,
he
I'm
can-
sure he may have far more information and
Great.
answers for you than I will.
Okay, well, Kathy really ran through a lot of stuff here, you know. I think the first thing that I want to say is that the way we have, I was chairing the task force. We had like 7 meetings in a 2-month period. We were charged with looking at the whether or not we should move to a directly elected mayor. Like I said, we were exactly like you guys, like you are. So, and then the second piece was, should we go to districts? Because we don't have districts as well. We recommended the 4-year mayor, directly elected mayor. We recommended districts. When we presented it to the city commission, the commission was much more interested in the directly elected mayor than they were in the wards. And so it's just kind of on hold at this point, the recommendations. The way we conceived of a directly elected mayor's role, we used the term a facilitative mayor to try to convey that the mayor does not have substantially more formal authority than the other commissioners. So theoretically, when you look at what Derby has, where the mayor only votes in case of a tie and the mayor has veto power, as I said, theoretically, that really does create a separation between the mayor and the city council. The norms are very important there. So the norms in Derby may be that it's still very collegial, but from a structural standpoint, those are formal differences. When our commission, I use the terms interchangeably, but when the commission charged us with our task, they were very clear that we would be operating within the foundation of council manager government, and that the mayor would be considered a member of the governing body, and that it was very important too, we talked about the city manager, that the city manager would be responsible to the governing body as a whole. So for us, the term governing body meant this kind of unified group with the mayor taking a facilitative role. And I'll in our task force report, we actually did identify some of the responsibilities that we thought for the mayor. So you can see how these are pretty much talking about a facilitative role. preside over the meetings, vote as a member of the governing body on every issue before the commission. And one of the arguments there was if the mayor only votes in terms of a tie, or, in terms of a tie, how do you know where the mayor stands on a particular issue? We want to know where the mayor stands on a particular issue. And then facilitate governing body envisioning, strategic planning, provide annual address, the city annual address, formally represent the city in ceremonial roles where that's requested, and then represent the city in intergovernmental roles where elected officials are expected. And after consultation with the governing body members, appoint residents to advisory boards. To come up with our recommendation, the directly elected mayor, nonpartisan to a 4-year term, we reviewed academic research on the topic. We corresponded with 2 nationally known scholars on local government. We reviewed salient sections of the National Civic League's Model Cities Charter. The National Civic League develops a model city, goes all the way back to the early 1900s, a Model Cities Charter. And they just revised the latest edition. And I was on that steering committee. So I was familiar with what that discussion was about as well. We had email correspondence with city management professionals nationally who have jurisdictions with directly elected mayors as well. So it didn't take us long to come to the conclusion that we wanted to have a directly elected 4-year mayor. But like I said, we really went back and forth on the district. What convinced us was for the directly elected 4-year mayor is that we noted that some 70% of council manager cities have adopted the direct election of the mayor. So 70% of cities nationally, like you have, and like Lawrence, have a directly elected mayor. The revised revision of the Model Cities Charter for the first time advocates for a directly elected mayor. In the past, they gave the different, the option. You could have directly elected or selected by the council. Now they're saying, no, we've seen enough of what's going on around the country.
Who was that? Who was that recommended that?
The National Civic League.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. And then we have the issue of the continuity of leadership with a 4-year directly elected mayor. But then there were 2 things that we did not state in the task force, and if I were doing it again, I would include these. The first, and I think actually for me, the most important reason for a directly elected mayor is you get somebody who wants to be mayor. When you do the way you do the mayors, the way we do the mayor now, you may end up with someone who's popular, but who really, once they get in the job and stuff, we actually had a mayor who went through a fairly traumatic event in our city. He was the mayor at the time, And after that event, he used to say, I'm counting the number of meetings until I won't be mayor again. So you think of it as, well, everybody runs for office. Well, like, no, once you get that responsibility, then it really kind of hits you, especially if there are the challenging issues, okay? And then the other that we didn't emphasize as much as I would today is the notion that the observation that more and more of the problems that cities are dealing with challenge the structures, the existing structures. So whether it's our departmental structures, whether it's our organizational structure as a whole, whether it's public-private, nonprofit, whether it's intergovernmental or so on, we're running into problems that do not correspond to the problem-solving mechanisms. And so what I see around the country, and it just so, I mean, it's so obvious now, is that we have started to use the term networks far more than we used to. So we used to talk about systems, and now we talk about networks. Networks are less permanent. There's less of a hierarchical structure. I mean, you could think of simple like city, county, school district, okay? So do you have any problems that might, lend themselves to the three, discussions among the three? Well, you might not have those discussions, but it might be of some value to have those discussions. Now the question is, who's in charge? It's not, see, we don't have those structures now where there is this authority. Influence in those settings is achieved in part by the continuity of the representatives and the continuity of the leadership. And that's one of the reasons why I would advocate for a directly elected mayor, because you are going to be involved with these other jurisdictions, with these other public-private, nonprofit. You're not going to have formal authority to decide, but to build the influence on behalf of the city takes continuity. The building of trust, recurs over time. And so increasingly, I'm in favor of the directly elected mayor. So I'd be happy to. I think that's all that, that's all. You have the task force report.
I have a question for either one of you or both of you. Both of your cities, Derby has it, Lawrence recommended it, a 4-year mayor term. Is there any benefit to a 4-year versus a 2-year? Obviously, there's pros and cons to both. If you get someone bad, you're stuck with them for 4 years. If you get someone good, they have to fight every 2 years. So was there a reason why Derby went that way? And is there a reason why Lawrence recommended that? Or was it just how it worked with staggering elections and votes? And
I think for us is we wanted to do kind of, if we're going to enhance the role of the mayor, the leadership of the mayor, let's provide a structure there that will enable that leadership to happen. And that to us was 4 years.
okay.
Yeah. And Derby did not deal with that at all. It's been 4 years for decades. So that was not a decision point. I will say, though, in the task force report, one thing I noticed in here was the reference to hopefully the 4 years would improve the discourse, public discourse. And I read that and I thought, okay, I'm hearing you on that one, because we have, state representatives that are 2-year terms. But most things, school boards, counties, most things are 4 years. I think it's just kind of standard. But those who do have the 2-year, it certainly puts you in front of voters more frequently, and some would say that's a good idea. But I think the opposite there is that when you deal with hairy, scary, yucky issues, which is sometimes what we deal with, if it were easy, it would already be figured out, and you wouldn't have to come to city council, right? I mean, you have to deal with some difficult decisions. Sometimes, you need 4 years to fully implement something.
Right.
If you have a vision for something new, a facility or something, it's going to be expensive. So from going from vision to actual approval to finding a way to fund it and then getting it built, hardly anything I can think of in a city is going to get done in 2 years. So it just, I think, helps you elevate the conversation about, let's not promise all kinds of change and then think we're going to get all this done in 2 years. 2 years goes fast.
Even in 2 years, I was surprised that the number of people that, I think the first time this got brought up, I think something got put in the paper about it. And so then people asked, and I was surprised to find out the number of people that had no idea how the mayor was selected for the city. And because 2 years passed between our elections, and so once you reminded them that you've actually never voted on a mayor, they go, oh yeah, I haven't, but they never thought of it. Just when they went to vote, there was 3 people's names on there, and they voted for 3 of the however many were on the ballot, or they voted for 3 of how many names were on the ballot. And so most people didn't really think about it. They just know that every year there was a mayor. And so,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
As part of your task force, how did you draw in any public comment at large?
Yeah.
And how did you do that? I mean, how did,
Well, we just opened, we just opened the task force meeting to public comment, and that was like on a Zoom call. But there weren't, you'd be surprised, there aren't a lot of people who are really interested until, until there's a proposal or, something like that. And I will say something else about the directly elected mayor. I think the campaign to become mayor is where the public discourse, where that public discourse can really take place. Because now, this is what I think we ought to be doing. This is what I think we ought to be doing. And so then I think more people are drawn into that conversation as well.
Yeah, I feel like, and when I ran, Rich ran and Rod ran, it's us 3 that were on the ballot then. And I think we had, do you remember, was there 8 or 9 people that ran?
Yeah.
it was
Quite a-
8.
There was quite a few.
It was 8, because if it was 9, we'd have had to have a primary.
Right, we didn't have a
Okay, there was
primary.
8. It was quite a few people.
Right.
And I'll just generally speaking, it was pretty evident who the 4 or 5 people were that were going to kind of rise to the top pretty early on. And it was even evident then too. And I know that Rod was, I mean, I knew Rod before that. Rich I didn't know well, but I got to know Rich well through that process. And it was, I mean, there was a pretty collective agreement, I think, that of who would be elected. And I still watched that night and felt like, oh my goodness, what if it doesn't work?
Right.
So,
I guess that raises a good question, and one that we kind of bantered about earlier a while back, is the election process, and how do you maintain a governing body through this type of a transition? And if I remember right, that's why Lawrence kind of pumped the brakes on this and said, not now. It's too soon. We haven't had enough discussions about it. But when you have 8 people, and now you're going to consider having a mayor's election, do you structure it to where people run for mayor and they're either mayor or they're not mayor, and it has nothing to do with the council body, the commission body? And how do you field enough candidates and participants? I like the idea of wards just from the standpoint of representation from your neighborhood and everything. I like that idea. That might actually help the mayor side, because the mayor would be an at-large, but the others would be from, so you could maybe not run into everybody's running for one thing. But when was the last time a city has made this shift, and did it work? That's what I want to know.
Well, it's a great question. I don't know the answer. I remember when Wichita did it. Was that maybe 15 years ago or something?
Churches. It was under churches.
Was it the
I
church?
believe so. I believe when Chris Churches was the city manager.
I'd have to go back and look, but I remember it. I have to tell you a story, too. It kind of gets at something you were saying a while ago and definitely addresses what you're saying. For years in Derby, I had a city council member who, and keep in mind, out of 9, the whole 16 years I was there, at any given time, only 1 or 2 of the 9 were women. And long time, a lot of them stay on a while, too. There's no term limits or anything. But I remember her being encouraged to run for mayor at one point, and she looked at it and looked at the duties, and she said, I don't want that, because, you know, and some of it's the way you want to live your life, or if you're working full-time or you have other responsibilities, it's like, I don't want to, like, every day go to this event or that event or whatever. But really, I like my voice. I like having a vote because I'm a policy person. I like digging into the agenda and reading the packet and thinking about, you know, should we do X for the long-term good of the city? And if I'm mayor, I don't have a vote. And, yeah, I mean, so, and I don't want to do all those speaking engagements. I think that gets at what John said earlier. Some people, you know, don't want to do all those speaking engagements for whatever reason. They might not be a good public speaker, or it just makes them nervous, or it just, but for her, she's a policy person, and she wanted to dig in and have a vote. So I think that speaks well of Lawrence's task force of saying, you know, don't go with this old form. The only reason Derby's is the way it is with the veto power and the breaking ties and the not voting is because that's an old, traditional city of the second class form. They didn't like say, well, here's what we want. You know, it's probably the biggest issue for people deciding, do they want to be mayor? Because people look at it and go, well, I don't get to vote. Why would I be mayor? You know what I mean? So, and like you said too, I think, is if they're all at large already, you're already at large. And if you're not going to break it down into wards or districts, and I mean, for smaller communities like this, why? Derby didn't decide to do that. They just always had wards, you know, for decades as a city of the second class. But more, we'll say larger communities like Lawrence, of course, it's grown a lot, and it had this old at-large way. So that's why they started looking at, say, well, we've grown so much, maybe we should have districts. Each district would have 20,000 people in the district. So compare that to Newton. I mean, you represent all, what, 18,000 or so folks now. So if you kept them all at large, I think one of the questions was, how do you differentiate the mayor if everybody else is at large too? Yeah. And I think, honestly, you just have to explain to people, well, the role's different. And honestly, everybody has in their minds what they think a mayor is. And it varies by city, but people have this impression. But what does it basically mean to all of us? Leadership.
But your point, Kathy.
The mayor's the leader,
Your
right?
point, Kathy, about the residents, the way the residents, you know, they think of mayor in terms of, you know, like big city mayors, you know, and that's not what, you know, that's not what this is about. Now, I will say something, though, about the district, and one of the things that we talked about with districts is that we might actually get more people interested in running because they already would know, you know, hopefully they would already have connections, and really importantly, it wouldn't cost as much money to run.
Right.
And I don't know about here, but in Lawrence, I think that's getting to be an issue.
So in that sense, though, the mayor could run from any district, and you could have multiple people running for that seat from even the same district or different districts or anything like that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about the districts. It says in here, or maybe you said that the commission or the council did not move forward, or they weren't interested in moving forward with the districts. Was it because some of them wouldn't be able to run again, or there was multiple people from what would be considered the same districts, or?
No, I don't think
Okay.
that was it at all. I think it was more, a more theoretical discussion of, we don't want sectors,
Yeah.
we want.
One interesting thing I think we hear often here is that they say some citizens, uninformed people that haven't paid attention to
Yeah.
everything that we do, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful sense, it's just that they're not paying attention. They often say, well, the city commission, the city only cares for everything south of Highway 50. And interestingly, I'm the only one that lives south of Highway 50. And so it's sort of, I enjoy sometimes telling people that, like, actually, I'm the only one that lives south of Highway 50. Everybody else lives north of Highway 50. Leroy's the closest one that lives to Highway 50, but even still not that far south. And so that seems
that's a
that
good
would be a
point.
talk.
One of the things that we did was we took census data, and we actually, I tried to break the city down and saying, okay, if we have X number of districts, how would we theoretically, not politically, but just how would we do it? And I just, made 4 quadrants.
Like how we hope the state would do it, right?
Yeah,
without
right.
any-
Made 4 quadrants, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
To look at the demographics. That's the thing.
You guys are nearly 5 times the size Lawrence is
Yeah.
of Newton in population, but I was looking at square footage, and if it's right, if what Google tells me is right, is that Newton is 14.57 square miles, and Lawrence is 34.97. So you guys are 5 times the size, but only a little over 50 or 100, twice the size in footprint size. So just an interesting, I was thinking that, and I don't know that we haven't really had any talks about whether or not we would do districts. I think it was primarily around just whether or not we have an elected mayor, but it would be, I don't know that I would even be a fan of it, but it would be interesting to see how that would be divided up. But I was wondering, I figured it was probably based off of population more so than just location.
Well, there are state rules that it has to be equal number of people. It has to be contiguous. What else?
So those are, so even at the city level, those rules still apply if you divide up in
yeah.
districts? Okay, interesting, yeah.
Yes.
We heard a lot about that in the news just, a year or so ago? Yeah. So,
Yeah. And the cities right now are waiting their turn for redistricting or changing the
We're in
district
line.
boundaries. It should be coming up next.
We're in
now that
line,
the
yeah.
State got done.
okay.
Yeah. And it's just because cities annex, and so you change, you have to add on. And then, yes, then in Derby, there's 4 wards, and so they have to make sure, and of course, the growth is happening in 2 wards, and the other 2 aren't growing. And so you have to change the boundaries to make that work. But I think what's more important on that is just to, if you have a sense, and if you don't, a little research can get you there. If you have a sense, if you believe and/or if your community believes that the community is well and fairly represented on this body. So if you feel like you represent the community's diversity well enough. On the other hand, if you believe there's always somebody talking about how the fact that nobody in my neighborhood ever gets elected, or I can't afford to run because, da-da-da-da-da. And so, and some of it's ethnic demographics, but some of it's wealth demographics. In Derby, it's a lot of wealth, because when you have the new houses being built this direction, and they're, $400,000 houses, and the old houses over here are, in today's values, maybe 150, and some less than that. Well, then you start get people talking about the haves and the have-nots, and thinking that That, I will tell you, from what I have heard elected officials in Derby talking about the last several years, they don't want to get rid of their wards because they feel like, you know, these people tend to be the majority on council versus these people in my neighborhood can't get there, don't get there, are intimidated, aren't encouraged, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know your community, I don't know your demographics, but you can look at your history of the board, the commission, and think about and plot it out on the map. Are you typically self-diversifying? I mean, geographically, you get the diversity if you look at elections over, 50 years or something. You can say, well, there's always people from different parts of town, so it's happening without us having to change to make that happen.
We actually did that in the task force. We actually, the city gave us the home addresses of, commissioners over the past 20 years. And we plotted it, on the map to see, is there one particular side of the city that is more represented than the other? And it was pretty evenly distributed when you broke it into 4 quadrants.
Is there ever, have you felt like in Derby specifically, was there ever sort of a jockeying for their particular area of the community for improvements versus others? And how did that affect the citizens' response?
Great question. You get a little bit of that, but it's not nearly as pronounced as it is in some communities where I've seen cities that every agenda item, if you get a detailed packet, one of the fields at the top in the header, it's the date and it's the title, and one of the fields is which district is it in? This is in District 6.
Oh.
And you talk about it all the time. Well, this is in District 5, this is in District 6. And maybe they do it to help those council members, oh yeah, that's my district. I'm supposed to make the motion, because it's my district. Maybe they do it for cues, but I think some people look at that and say, I like electing, like in Derby, I've heard this said, I like electing by ward to make sure all neighborhoods are represented, but I don't want us to talk about the wards and make it part of the agenda and make it like you only get called on certain things because they're in your ward type of thing. I mean, they've wanted to downplay it just to make sure it doesn't become that, well, and I've seen this, okay? The CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, is broken out by district, and if it's uneven, well, that's not fair. Well, never mind that a $50,000 bridge is needed here and a $500,000 bridge is needed over here. It's not about what the need is. People get petty, right? But I do think, I mean, and John, you might correct me, but I think communities that are at large, the primary reason that they would go to districts is about representation and equity of communities, like a segregated community, that it's very clear that all communities within the city have a chance.
And I don't know, I mean, don't have any idea on the past 30 or 40 years, but I feel like currently, we all do a really good job of wanting what's best for the city as a whole and not areas. I mean, I think that's true for the 5 people sitting here tonight, so.
Well, we've never had to frame it in such a way.
Right.
I don't even give that a second thought, whether
I
it's
don't-
my
yeah.
neighborhood or Ridley's or.
And I don't think that I would have any interest in even having further discussion about that. I don't know that it's even, yeah.
We're pretty comfortable with our staff's ability to prioritize projects based on need and cost.
Because we've
And,
never, no,
yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would sure hate to see
Yeah.
us start jockeying to satisfy our.
Yeah, it sure seems petty.
And we've never had that in our history,
No.
have we, districts here in the city?
No, now I will tell you, excuse me, we do have maintenance areas where
Correct.
so we have 7 maintenance areas across the city, and that is more for the ease and also for cost of mobilizing the contractors and also for our staff, where we, like when we do like crack seal and overlay, slurry seal, those kinds of projects, tree trimming in the rights of way, we do those on an annual basis in Area 1, next year's Area 2, Area 3, such and such. But it all gets rotated through at least once every 7 years for each maintenance area.
And just the point I was going to make in that is just to say that since we've never had it, the city's done a very good job of meeting the needs of each area collectively over, I don't know, however long, for the 150 years, right?
150th birthday this year. so
Yeah, I mean, it didn't take me long. I was going to say however long the city of Newton's been around, but I had to remember. So, yeah.
And that's not to say that when an emergency does arise, we don't address it immediately, of course. Like if you've got a water main break, or if it's a priority, like, you may recall early this year, February, Marchish, we had a 24-inch water main break at Newton Medical Center. The entire hospital complex, not just the hospital, but all those doctors' offices, the dialysis center, nobody had water. So that obviously became the priority and was all hands on deck. And so, just because we have those maintenance areas, that's our goal, but sometimes we have to have those priority projects that need to be prioritized. And if I may, a couple of you have made comments to me over time on this body and also the previous one I served under, and John and Kathy both alluded to it. One of the challenges I know several of you have mentioned to me is being mayor, especially like for Clint and Rich. When you guys were first elected, you immediately, your second year in, you were the vice mayor. So you became mayor. So you had 1 year to figure out how to be a commissioner. And then by the end of your second year, your third,
that would've been
your
right.
third,
First year as vice
your
mayor.
first year.
Yeah.
So, and it's like, just by the time you figure out how to be mayor at the end of your first term and do it really well and get the feel for what do you say, how do you say it, when do you show up, what are those priority needs, and how to prioritize your full-time job. And Rich is the CEO of a very large company, and so he's juggling family and personal life too. So it's like, you just figure out how to get the hang of it, and then your term's up.
What I've
then
figured
I've
out in the
got
past few weeks is sometimes it's okay to say no.
Yes, exactly. You get to a
I
point
had
where
to
you
say no
figure
to
out
something this
it
week,
is
and they were like,
okay.
they really want you to come. And I said, I'm already missing about a day and a half of work this week for city stuff. And it was like going to speak at the high school today, and I'm reading at the library Friday morning to a group, I don't know, pre-K kids, whatever, and little kids. I shouldn't say whatever. They're little ones. I don't know if they're kindergarten. They're at-home kids. Parents bring them for some kind of but it was like, there was one more thing to go to, and Rich, I think you were there, correct? And so I was there, like, they really want you to come read it, and I just said, I just can't, like, I already have so much missing already, so.
And Commissioner Kane's probably our most senior member right now. You've been on the commission for 11 years, 12 years now?
Well, no.
10, at least 10?
At the end, it'll be almost 13 years.
Okay.
I'm done with this term.
And so he's been mayor multiple times. And so he's kind of got the hang of the gig, so to speak. He knows when it's his turn to be mayor, which, he's the vice mayor now. So, if we maintain our process, he would be mayor next year. And so, and we have those established relationships, like we have standing meetings, or, they know I'm going to call them on a Sunday night. And if I'm calling, we probably better answer because it's probably something big we got to talk about. But it's like, but to your point, every person has what they need, what they want. Do they work in town? Do they work out of town? Do they have little kiddos? Are they coaching 5 teams on the side besides their little kiddos? So it's every person who becomes mayor has their own rhythm. And so we as staff get into that rhythm, and just as they're getting the hang of it, we're getting the hang of it, and then it's time to change again.
It's mid-October, and I'm just finding mine.
Exactly, yeah, to your point. So it's a wonderful job, but it is, I mean, Clint and I were just talking about this yesterday, it is much more demanding to be the mayor, time-wise, than it is to be one of the other commissioners. So, and they've all been there at this point, I think. Commissioner, you will be the vice mayor next year, so, so we'll start the rotation again. So I think one of the things that was appealing to you, this governing body, at least what I have heard you all say in different ways, is that one of the reasons to consider this would be that continuity of visionary leadership. And we have seen that happen in our past, where we have somebody who has really particular projects, or they're very growth-minded, and we've unfortunately gone through those cycles just like every other community, where you have somebody who gets elected because they intentionally want to dismantle what those previous elected officials wanted to do for either personal or political reasons. And it's frustrating. It's hard for staff to see all this hard work and planning, and you spent money and designed projects and paid architects, and then the next governing body goes, nope, starting over. We don't want to do that anymore, or new location, or whatever. And it's disheartening too for your staff in a lot of ways. And I know you guys know that. We've had a lot of these conversations over the years. So I think that they really appreciate you guys being able to give that feedback as outsiders who have been in different systems, and both as elected officials and as the staff. I think it's very valuable feedback for them to process.
Well, I for one can certainly say, well, and you're second in hot pursuit, that I certainly appreciate this body as opposed to the first 2 or 3 or 4 years that I served, which was nothing like what we have here. We really have something pretty special.
Great.
You know, we respect each other. We don't agree. Why would we? Why should we? We each have different opinions, and that's okay. You know, we can agree to disagree, but
So then your challenge is, how do you take advantage of the collective, how do you develop the collective will? You know, and then how do you express that? If you do have that sort of agreement implicitly, I think it's really important to say, okay, this is rare. How are we going to take advantage of this collectively? You know, one of the things that I say, one of the major parts of the presentations that I make now is that there's a prerequisite to effective governance, and that is being able to connect political will, meaning what is it we want to do, with operational sustainability. Can we do it? All right? And you know the number of items that come to you that staff says we need to do X, Y, and Z, and now the question is the political will behind that? And so your job really, especially if you're saying, you know, we're on board here, is to be able to articulate that political will in a way that really is motivating to staff. See, because it really will be. And that there's that space there between politics and administration, which structurally we've created with the city manager. See, we've created that in order for the administrative staff to tell you what you need to know rather than what you want to hear. Given that separation, though, nothing gets done unless you can make the connection. And so your ability to be able to see that and articulate a political will is really, really important.
Can I ask, I know that some time back when we talked about this, we were looking at ways, and I think, Chris, you may have been looking into this or not, but how we would go about having a mayor and commissioners without it going to a November ballot, changing, how would we do that? Would it be a specific 2-year term for a mayor? Would that be indicated on the ballot? But again, not changing the form of government, so to speak. So based on what you have heard here tonight and what questions have been asked, can you paint some sort of a picture for us if let's say we didn't go with wards, but how would we do it without having to upset the apple cart, if you will, but yet still have an elected mayor? You know, because I know there are people in the community that appreciate what we have now and don't see it necessary to change that. And I'm not disagreeable to some change, but it has worked quite well. And I know that people have asked, you know, how is the mayor elected? How do you choose the mayor? And a mayor is a focal point for citizens and somebody for people to look up to and to go to. So can you paint a short, whoever, a picture
I will
of
defer to
what
our
we
esteemed
would
city
do?
attorney on the technicalities of the law.
Sure. And obviously, a lot of it depends on which direction you want to go. But yeah, it's our position that any change to the form of government is going to require the voters. You know, we talked about the form that we have now in terms of the way we select the mayor. And is it the same in Lawrence that it's traditional in terms of vote, but there's nothing binding in that regard? Is that true?
Right.
Right. So we talked about changing those policies that would not require a vote of the public, but anything in terms of the structural form I think we need to decide, I guess, what we want to do, the process, and I can give you a firm opinion on that.
And would that require adding another commissioner?
It would not.
Or not?
Not at all.
Leaving it? Okay.
Not at all.
Can I add on to Kathy's question? You said something earlier about a decision that could be made, and if there was no protest, then it wouldn't.
A charter amendment.
Right, amendment to
And
the
that's
charter.
different from changing.
Well, and I believe what Lawrence was looking at, there's a specific statute that talks about abandoning a form of government, and that's the route that you guys were looking under. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we'd never get away with a charter ordinance.
Sure.
In terms of, because a charter ordinance is just you all voting to make it happen.
Subject to protest, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, but, no, we could never get away with that politically.
Right.
So we would go for a public.
Right. And again, to me, it turns on the direction that if we're talking about a minor change to how we select the mayor internally versus a vote, and I'll give you a formal opinion on that.
Yeah.
Could I give you an example? So a recent charter ordinance change that you all made as this governing body was Sunday liquor sales. Do you recall that? And we did have a protest, and so it did go to a vote. It was a year ago, 2 years ago?
No, it
About
was
3 years ago?
Three,
I've slept since then. Where does the time go? So, but that would have been something that this governing body, you guys had that. So if there had not been a protest, after that specific set amount of time, that ordinance would have become law. Similar to like when the governor gets a bill on her desk, if she doesn't veto or sign in a certain amount of time, by default, it becomes law. So another example, I would tell you, we do also have, not under my tenure, I know for sure under Denise's, and probably Aaron's, we have had a precedent set where even though we have a mayor who is a one-year mayor, we had several members who either didn't have the time or did not have the gumption or the desire to be the mayor, as Kathy mentioned earlier. And so think about Mr. Willis Heck. Mr. Willis Heck, as Kathy has known for many years when we worked with him at REAP, he was mayor for multiple years in a row. Maybe even several different times, multiple years in a row. But again, that was under your current form and process and policy. So that could be a change to the policy. You could say instead of 1 year, you could have a 2-year term mayor. That would be a policy change versus a charter ordinance change.
Yeah, currently, what you have, how you decide on the mayor is in a policy, in the city policy, and we are looking at changing or just upgrading those policies anyway. So if there's a change of how you want to do that, that is where we could do it without taking anything to a vote or doing a charter ordinance.
For us, I just want to comment on the third page and just the responsibilities of an elected mayor that Lawrence came up with. I feel like was kind of my ideas, and it kind of fits what I would consider to be the responsibilities now as well. But
Agreed.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
very-
I think
this
it's
is
very
basically
similar
what
to
our
that.
mayor does now.
yeah. So I think when we first started this conversation, I think maybe I was the first one to bring it up. But I, of course, didn't know the process, and I thought that it would look the same. It would just be an elected mayor versus an appointed mayor. And so I know one of our things says next steps, and I don't want us to get to the end of this meeting and not have next steps discussed. But I mean, I think it would be wise to get a formal plan for what next steps are. If we feel like we need a task force, it looks like Lawrence has done a lot of the work. I would assume that we're probably not going to be much different, and especially with what you said too, that the National Civic League even recommended that.
Yeah.
70% of the cities like us have a directly elected mayor. Is that pretty recent trend, or there's no trend? It's
No, I
just
don't think so.
moving that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
And Commissioners, you may recall, I think Ms. Aaron and Ms. Rebecca had given you some options to solicit some public feedback. There have been a number, and I think Ms. Kathy and I discussed this, there have been a number of recently developed digital platforms, and they can be either mostly facilitated and handled by us through our social media, through our website. There are a couple of companies now that work with other cities in this area. I believe we got a great recommendation. Aaron, remind me, Arc City or Winfield, that had utilized a specific platform, and it can do multiple surveys. Now, they're not necessarily scientific like we talked about with Dr. Glazier, thank you. Dr. Glazier at WSU, when he did our last community survey in 2019, that does not mean that the data and feedback is not valuable. They are, excuse me, okay, well, there we go, I stand corrected, thank you. So it's important to know, because it does make a difference, I mean, to the amount of data and the quality of data you get back. And one of the companies we looked at, we were gonna be able to use for multiple surveys and inquiries for community feedback for different options. You know, we had recently had discussions about a potential sales tax in the future, and what was the public's interest in that, or their level of support for those kinds of options. So we had talked about that, and it was a fairly insignificant amount of money in the scheme of things, especially to be able to use it for multiple questions and surveys. So that might be part of next steps, is do you want to talk about how we would, taking this into account, because again, John and his team have done yeoman's work here and done a lot of the difficult legwork nationally, locally, and even within the state of Kansas for communities similar to us. So you know, that's, I would just throw that out there for a point. We talked about that you guys might be interested in pursuing something like that, more digitally feedback, because the feedback came in a much more timely manner too. It was pretty quick, as I recall.
You know, one other thing too, you know, we came here to share and get the conversation started per your request, but there's one piece of data we haven't said, and that is, I think it's 665 cities in the state of Kansas, something close to that. But 47, as I understand it, are commission form, okay? So that means they're pretty much set up how you are, where everybody takes turns being mayor. You select your own mayor instead of having a directly elected mayor. 47 out of 600 and some, right? So some of those, I looked at the list, and you can get a handful of 10 of those that are not tiny little cities, okay? They're your size or bigger, you know, I mean, Pittsburgh and Salina and Garden City and Abilene, some that are similar. You could do like 10 of them or something. And not just look to see what they are, but talk to them. So, I mean, whether that's, you know, having staff or hiring a firm or somebody to like really talk to find out, well, have you ever considered this? Or are you considering it now? Or are you thinking about, you know what I mean? Just finding out that, if that's important to you to find out. I will go back to something that was said earlier too. When I saw form of government, you know, was the title for the workshop, I did a little bit of this because I think it was what Mr. Towles here just said a minute ago. This is a minor change, okay? This is not, most cities, if you're talking about form of government, you're talking about something bigger. So just how you select the mayor is I think would be fair to say that's a minor. It matters to you all because you live with it year in and year out, but I think it was said earlier, most people don't even know how the mayor is selected now. They figured they probably elect him. Everybody elects a mayor, right? So it is a minor change.
And I'll agree with what Kathy said, that there are, you know, there's citizens that have said, don't change it. But it's typically, to me, what I've heard is that it's typically followed with, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And my reply to that is that, no, you're right, it's not broke, but there could be a better way.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that's, I'm always in favor of the citizens having a voice, and I feel like, you know, I think one thing we've realized this year, at least I've realized, and maybe more so than any other time, and partially because it's the 150th, is just how much of a cheerleader or a champion for the community that person can be. So it's, I don't know, I think it's worthy of our time to move forward, but.
It makes sense to me to couple together several topics with a survey and feedback from the public. For instance, the sales tax, the form of government, and if whatever else we're contemplating, not just a single issue.
I'm definitely for getting citizen feedback and response and everything. I don't really have interest in changing something just to change or just because somebody else does it, because we are Newton and we don't have to do things the way everybody else does it. We need to do things the way that our community wants us to and the way that our community thrives. So I think it's key to get some feedback and go from there.
I would just say to Leroy's point, I would just probably caution with regard to a survey of mentioning a sales tax increase right now.
I was
Yeah.
just giving that as an example.
Yeah,
of-
okay, okay.
Of issues. I'm
Yeah.
not zeroing in on that one necessarily.
Okay.
At least put that question after the mayor question.
I would say we would need the governing body to
put Leroy
prioritize
wants to
this.
know.
Yeah,
Leroy
I
wants
think.
to know.
I want to know.
I think we need to
You guys want to pay more in
rest for a
taxes?
while.
We would not be, at least I would defer to our communications director, but I would not recommend doing multiple topics at one time. I guess I was just saying, like, we have that opportunity that this particular tool could give us options. And maybe we ask the question about this, and some of the feedback we get goes, oh, we didn't really look at it that way. Maybe we need to re-ask the question in a different manner.
Yeah.
Or to a different constituency. And so I guess I was thinking we just had, this particular platform gave us options for multiple surveys, whether it's the same topic.
Did we make the decision on the platform? I know
You
we
did.
spoke to it.
Yes,
and
we
it-
did. You guys did kind of informally give a head nod to
Okay.
the one you wanted to select.
And that was one that would allow us to do multiple within a period that it wasn't a one and done. Okay, that's.
Makes sense.
Is there a way to get that survey to non-utility holders, like the people that rent?
Oh, yeah, we could
I had a
post it on
little
our website. We
exchange
could
with the
post it on our
guy
website.
that said he didn't get an opinion because he lives somewhere where a landlord must have got his survey.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
It was a nice exchange, though. It wasn't one of those
Wasn't that pleasant?
other ones. Yeah.
Enjoy it.
I don't want to say we're done, but I sure appreciate you coming, Kathy and
This
John,
has
to
been
help us.
very
This is
Very informative.
very helpful.
Yeah,
Very much
appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
I think we could listen to you too for several more hours. Just tell us your stories and what you did. So,
Appreciate you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all for
We
what you're
appreciate
doing.
it. Thank you.
Always good to see you, Kathy.